For this particular episode of my Patreon AMA, obviously the newest thread will be up on the website if you go to the description box. I will also say I have finally implemented that feature I promised in many of the past episodes, where for one of the tiers, at the moment I'm making it the $75 tier because I didn't really have like a good logic as to what was the difference between 50 and 100. It's something to put in there. I'll play around with it depending on any feedback I get or how many people sign up to it. But basically, if you're at the $75 tier or above, then I will pick out some of the best, in theory, the ones that almost demand a longer video than just a 5-minute, 10-minute answer, like their own video. I'm picking out those topics, making a poll of them, and putting it up there on Patreon. And you, if you are at the $75 tier above, can vote which of these topics I do as a future video. So I already did one of them. The winner was to do the top 10 Quake matches of all time. By the way, because of where I've priced it at the moment, I think it was very few people voted on that poll. So you could have a tremendous amount of influence and impact yourself if you're at one of these tiers. Right now, if you go to the description box, there is another poll available there. If you're at this tier, you can vote for which one of the next ones. I actually took one of the questions out of this episode and put it into one of those polls. So this could indeed be one that gets expanded upon. Let's get into it. So Barbara Stanwyck's Legs says, in your I Am Esports video, you mentioned Angel Munoz as someone who could make the same statement. What I know about Munoz comes from Reflections interviews, Thresh, Machiavelli, Vu, Midway, and from reading old posts and comments on ESR, ES Reality. Could you give me a sense for what he and the CPL meant for esports, good and bad? Yeah. Like, the problem here is there was obviously a lot of bad things associated with him, potentially stealing money, being a bit of a scumbag to people, lying, like manipulating, coercing people, being, I would say, quite predatory and exploitative in some of his business practices and even personal dealings, quite frankly. Seemed like a bit of an arsehole as a boss, maybe. Didn't share a lot of power, took a lot of credit. There's a lot of negatives, but here's the problem. Like everyone else in esports, you've got to give them their due if they did something good. Like, if you don't know, when the CPL came along, there wasn't like ESL. That didn't exist. Like, there was no big European tournaments like that. At the time, the other big tournament was one called PGL, not to be confused with the one from Romania. It was called like Professional Gamers League or whatever. This is actually where Thresh began, was playing in that tournament. And famously, it wasn't Thresh who was playing in the CPLs. That was other people from that league, like Machiavelli, Immortal, who were willing to go over and play there and sort of try the circuit, as it were. CPL was in Texas. PGL was an online thing with a big finals thing in like New York or something. So yeah, at the time it was a burgeoning industry. There wasn't an esports. Like, this is one of the companies that helped push the idea of esports. Before, it was just like Quake or Doom or whatever it was. That was the big game. And people like the CPL, it's called the Cyber Athlete Professional League. They tried to coin a term, cyber athlete. They knew that, like, call them sports stars, you can have a million. To this day in 2023, you get sports. But if you just call them a gamer, well, that's just a kid who plays. That's your grandson playing Fortnite. So you've got to have a name for them. In this case, cyber athlete. Look, cyber hasn't aged well, obviously, but it wasn't like a terrible attempt at a term. It's the reason why when Tobias Sherman, a long-tenured agent in the space of esports, did that whole thing about like new sports, I was open to that idea too. I think esports somewhat has made some success as a term, but it hasn't gone quite far enough, and now it includes stupid stuff like streaming and little kids games, which doesn't make a lot of sense for like top level professional play, does it? So I thought that whole topic, like, that was an interesting area that they were involved in pushing things forwards. I would say he was a very ambitious individual. Like, he had a vision that it could be enormous. He did some really big early business deals, got some giant companies, the Intels of the world through the door, the Nvidias, really early on. We're talking early 2000s here. He was even able, by the way, to get Valve recognition for his first major in CS 1.6, which wasn't even 1.6 at the time. It was like 1.3, which was the CPL Winter 2001 tournament, the famous one that Nip won over X3 with the $50,000 for first place. That was technically a world championship. Valve gave it their like blessing. That's why Heaton always joked that he was the only world champion in Counter-Strike, because he won the only official world championship, and then they never held another one. So technically he's still reigning champion until CSGO, right? So that's a big deal, though. At the time, people won't get this. Valve barely gave a flying fuck at the end of 1.6. That's why I always tell that mega embarrassing story of when Gabe Newell came to like CBIT in the time when Na'Vi was the best 1.6 team. I think it was in 2011 when they'd already won the previous year. And then when someone asked him about Na'Vi, he just said some whack answer like, I'd love to see if we just got like a bunch of people about the public, like how many would it take to kill one of these guys? It's like, bro, it's Counter-Strike. Like even in Quake 3, they have the machine gun that kills you off spawn. Like it's Counter-Strike. Like it wouldn't take 50 people to kill Markov, you idiot. If you just put them in a server, it would happen within like seconds. Have you never played a CIS yet? So it just showed that Valve knew nothing about Counter-Strike. They knew fucking nothing. And then even in CSGO, I've told people in the early days, it was mad scuffed. So the idea you can even get that game dev in the early 2000s when this game, at this point in time, by the way, Counter-Strike's still barely taken off as a game. It's just online it has hype. It's not like the biggest game in the world yet or whatever. Like, it's actually amazing that you even managed to get them involved. So that's a big deal. It means you are, because there's another thing, people like ESL and the big people up in the scene, they have more direct connections in that sense than the random people in the scene. Like, a lot of people can't get Valve's attention, don't even know how to contact them. Then also, they had that whole thing where they started out with Quake, and then they pivoted to Counter-Strike very successfully for a number of years. One of the biggest, if not the biggest org in the world at running tournaments. While World Cyber Games was huge in terms of money and prestige, but it wasn't like the best tournament. ESWC was maybe like, in theory, the best tournament, but took years and years to get established, and then its problems went bust. So actually, CPL for most of the time was considered the de facto championship, especially in Counter-Strike, particularly in Counter-Strike. Like, even if you won ESWC or World Cyber Games or Click, whatever other tournament elsewhere, if you went right afterwards to like the CPL Summer or CPL Winter, and someone like Heaton and Potty won that one, they were the world champion. They were number one. They won the real tournament that counted, and you just won another tournament and were a very good team. That's how big a deal CPL was back then. They were the brand leader, as it were, of the industry. Then I'd also throw in there as well, even though I didn't like how it was done, like I thought it was very scuffed, the execution of the CPL World Tour, because if people don't know, it could have been Quake 3 or Doom 3, but it ended up being bloody Painkiller that nobody played or watched. And don't bother telling me for a millionth time, like a player, but it was very fun to watch. Yeah, we know that, but Quake is very fun to watch and very fun to play. Therefore, it would have been 100 times better. But even so, they still did have a world tour with like $1 million or whatever. And it was in all those different stuff. I think it was like 8 or 9 events. They had a big finals in New York. They went all around the world. This was like Formula One, but in esports. It was really fucking awesome. I still think it's the best tournament circuit ever done in esports, quite frankly. If you look at concept, execution, beyond like the game angle, the fact that it did do what it promised it would do. It had all the top players. It was like Formula One. They were all competing month after month after month. You got to see the same people battling. This time he came third. Now would he come second? Oh no, he come fifth instead. Like, it was actually really great to follow the same way Formula One was. Now, yeah, as I alluded to, there's plenty of bad things. Engineers could be tyrannical. I mean, I've even told this story or hinted at previously that even with the press, like I once did an interview with him where basically a few questions in, and I wasn't trying to do any gotcha journalism or fuck with this guy at all. I asked a critical question, which, like, you know, some people have concerns about perceptions of this around the CPL. And he basically told me just straight up, like, would you like that to be your last question in this interview? And tried to like play hardball with me. But luckily, even back then, I basically told him to go shove it up his arse and just told him something like, how about I just ask 2 or 3 more questions and we leave it there? You know, something like that. Because I've never been one to be pushed around like that. Also, he's had many times, it seemed like he was, let's say, I would say if you said or did anything vaguely to do with Ingenuous, there'd be reprisals, whether you were right or wrong in telling the truth. Certainly in the industry, people were scared of him. It was implied, I haven't got the hard evidence to suggest this, it was implied because CPL didn't pay out some of the money. I mean, I'm sure they had some sponsor issues at times. It was implied that he embezzled or stole some of it. That's what was often heavily suggested back in the day by the idea he didn't want you to like film his house or show people where he lived. It was apparently some like badass house in Texas that had like all fucking like art exhibit stuff in it that would cost a lot of money. So it was implied like people thought maybe he like profited unduly from the business. And then I would also say, even though at the time he was one of the people who was definitely like an IM esports figure, like some Genesis figure, he did try to oversell it like he was just esports itself, like the father of esports. Essentially, this would be the best analogy if you're a casual. Right, obviously, if you know about the space of computing, you'll know Steve Jobs was incredibly influential and important, but he wasn't like he wasn't like the person in the history of computing. But if he tried to claim like I'm the father of the home computer or something, sort of, but also sort of not Steve, you know. It's like that with Angel Munoz. Was he the father of esports? He was certainly one of them, and in a way at a time he was, but then he also wasn't true, and sometimes wasn't the best father in that regard, was he? So I think that's enough about him. I think that makes sense. I think I've done a pretty fair job there. I also think, by the way, in the early days, esports was a scam and didn't have the financial legs to stand on. Therefore, in a fucked up way, I wouldn't do it or suggest it. You sort of needed scam-type people or people with the skills to trick someone to oversell it and then to get the money in the door. Otherwise, it would have been an even more small scene for many, 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 many more years. We're probably 10 years behind where we are now. Bean Burrito Earlier, I asked you about Apex's career, so that was in a past episode. Clearly, their roles, as well as their career arcs, were quite different, but now Crims is in a similar situation, admittedly, slightly outside the elite level. He is the final old-school Swedish CSGO player at Tier 1, and aside from NIP, Rez and Brolan, the only Tier 1 Swede at all. Like your answer for Apex, how would you characterise his career and longevity? What do you think the future holds for him? Right, what I think is key about Crims' career is this, is if you took his raw skill set and like appetite to play the game and to keep at a good level, I actually think he could have been a much greater player. Like essentially, when I watch his game, I always thought it was a little bit reminiscent of Cold Zeras in the sense that neither of them have crazy aim. They don't really have like that crispy, like the headshot aim, like snapping between heads. They've just got that consistent aim. This is why I've always said people actually, because he's not as skilled as Forrest, people made out like Get Right isn't skilled. Get Right's a fabulously skilled player, guys. It's just not all pure headshot aim. These are the guys where it's more like they just kill you and it almost looks like a normal player's kills. You could believe it was someone in your matchmaking rank that killed someone. But they're consistently doing it against the best players. They're using positioning to get the kills. They've got consistent technique and they clearly put in the hours and polish up their game and they're just good. Like they're not like they're whiffing on everything. They just don't instantly kill you in the head with the headshot. They kill you with a chest shot or a few bullets sprayed into your body, or they catch you at an off angle and they kill you with some 2 or 3 seconds really quickly. Like I would say in that sense, like someone who always reminded me of the best things about his game was like well-rounded, generally polished. It didn't look super crispy, but you could tell like everything was at a high level, understood everything, comfortable at all times. There's a key thing as well, comfortable at all times. So as a result, if you look at why he's lasted this long, it's probably because even at his peak, he's one of the best supportive elements ever. If you have him as a bomb site anchor, or sometimes in an entry position or with the entry pack or in the middle of the pack on T side, it's just a guy who's just going to do his job. He's just going to run in, no questions asked, do what he's asked to do, consistently output damage, follow people up, work with util, work with any other player you want, whether that's Broline in the latter days, whether that's Olaf in the early days, whether that's JW in the middle pit. It could be anyone. This guy can just seemingly do it all. So seems like one of the best teammates ever. Also, doesn't seem like he brings any negative ego or takes up room in the team in terms of personality and presence. So that means you can afford other egos and divas and presences there. And he's adding a lot to your team and championship caliber play, but he's not taking away from the group dynamic. If anything, he's just empowering it by being this just silent, fucking stoic Swede who just fucking dominates hard positions like B site on fucking Inferno or CT. Then on T side of the map, he's going in first past all the mollies and the flashes. And then he's winning clutches as well if he's in them on both sides. Like, this guy's too good, and then he partners with everyone. Like, I think he's just one of the best players. He's one of the most underrated players to ever play Counter-Strike. It's funny, everyone's now raved way too much, and for these last years when he's been whacked, giving him way too much credit to Zipnix. Zipnix isn't even vaguely underrated at this point in time. By definition, now, he's one of those underrated players who became overrated. Crims is the underrated one. Like, Crims is everything you think Zipnix was, and more. Like, the other thing about Crims was, he's only a support element at certain points in his career. Depends on what the lineup was, what the meta was. He could also, like in that 2019 version, he was probably the best player. I think at times he was better than Brolan. He definitely had a more consistent game, and he was still a beast. And you just look at how long he was at the top from. Guys, this guy was good at the first CSGO major in late 2013 in November. And he was also really good on LAN in 2019. And you could even argue, look, he's nowhere near the level now. He's still all right, though. He's still serviceable now, right? So to me, he's just one of those players. He's almost designed to last forever. He's just a guy who can stay in a team. Like, if people wanted an analogy, if you want a soccer analogy for this guy, he's like Clarence Seedorf, isn't he? Is he the absolute best player? No. Or at least he's not now, maybe many years ago. Obviously, we're talking at the end of Clarence Seedorf's career. If you think at the end of Clarence Seedorf's career, he was still boss the midfield, control the pace, like be in the right position, clearly like a top pro. Seems like he has a good like captain's mentality and presence in it. Like, this guy just has it all. Maybe he doesn't have like the personality aspects like a Seedorf, but I'm talking about the way the game. It looked like they were moving slow, but no one's taking the ball off them. They're doing what they want. They're creating passes. They're really successful at all points in their career. They can work with any team, any teammates. They're just fucking vintage players that just last. This is just quality that endures. And so, yeah, the longevity is insane. Understandably, he's outlasted everyone. Because let's be real, Olaf didn't really last. He just kept getting to play in FaZe Clan. He should have been in much, much worse teams. So to me, I think it makes sense when you consider the versatility this player has, and especially the mentality to be versatile, to keep putting the hours and never complain. And then finally, he's clutch. If you're clutch in CS, that can keep your game going so many more years. I mean, it's funny because even in his worst times, I always thought that was the thing about like JKS that stood out. It's like, mate, you can put him in a scenario though, he's going to win 1v1s and 1v2s. That's really valuable. People underestimate that. People act like all the top pros are clutch. Nah, most of them aren't clutch. It's quite rare. And then of the ones who are clutch, how many like consistent, the ones that really do it, so I think FaZe Clan have some amazing players now. That can almost be relied upon. You shouldn't be relied on people to win, like in theory scenarios where they're at a disadvantage. But these guys just do. Like you actually do rely on Brokey or Rops or someone just pull your ass out of the fire with some crazy 1v2 every now and then, don't you? And he's definitely in that category, one of the best clutch players of all time. There's an area he's mad underrated too. One of the best, not only 1vx clutches, but here's another analogy for you. I would say in the modern day, if you want to know at his peak what Crim's game was like, also compare it a little bit to Hunter's. Because Hunter also will play in the entry pack if you want. And Hunter will play a CT spot he maybe doesn't want to if you want. And also, I'll say this, Hunter is notoriously, not just with equal, very good at 2vx's. Crim's might be the most famous 2vx player ever. Think about how many rounds in 2vx him and fucking Olaf Meister have won on Inferno, or Dust 2, or fucking Mirage was a classic one, obviously. These guys were unbelievable. Stephen Dooley, as someone who never watched CS 1.6, I was wondering if you could elaborate on what the economy was like in that game, and is it at all comparable to the economy in CSGO? It's not really, as in, it was quite comparable when it was the economy from, like, let's say, like 2 or 3 years ago, where basically it was like the reset economy, where you build up and then you get completely reset down when you lose the round. And so as a result, if you could win like some crazy Deagle buy in 1.6, it would be comparable to winning the CZ or the Tech 9 buy where you force buy. It's just the difference was we didn't have Tech 9s and CZs, so there wasn't the OP pistols. There was the Deagle, and by the way, on CT side, only maniacs like fucking CIS players use that. You just use the USP and go for the headshot if you're actually a CT player. On T side, you might buy the odd Deagle. Even then, you're not doing it loads. It was more like Americans and just super raw skilled players who did that. More like CIS and Eastern Europe. Scandinavia was more, again, just about like pistols, or just do like, eventually you do like what the Poles and Snavi did, where you have 1 AK or 2 AKs and you work around it on T side. On CT side, you do the FAMAS in the util instead, or the gun with no armor. So I would just say there was much more limited choices in what to buy. Therefore, the economy was a bit more streamlined, and there were no OP pistols, like I say, and people weren't just spamming the Deagle every time. I would also say people were a lot more respectful with the force buys in that sense. I also think that positionally, CSGO has never been as dominant a game positionally as 1.6 did. So it feels like people multi-kill less. Not as in they don't get like 2 kills, but famously, like, this is the best example ever, is if you're the anchor player like a Crims on CT B site of Inferno, then usually either you are behind those main boxes looking out to the arch, or your teammate is going to be flashed to peek in, like Happy when he did the Deagle Ace against TSM. And basically that player in 1.6 many times, if he's against pistols, will just kill all 5 players. When does that ever happen in CSGO? I'm not talking about has it ever happened. I'm saying it would routinely happen in 1.6. It almost never happens in CSGO. So as a result, I also thought the economy, like, essentially, I don't feel like you died as easily in CS 1.6. So I also think the economy was less brutal in that sense. And then also, the AWP obviously had the same kill reward as all the other guns in 1.6. In CSGO, it doesn't. It has $100 kill reward. You didn't need as much utility because utility was just worse in 1.6. Flashbangs only blinded you. They didn't make you deaf. So famously, if you were really good with sound cues, you could still get the kill if you had like the crosshair lined up on the guy. Smoke grenades were way worse and lasted less time and took up less space, therefore they weren't as necessary and quite frankly as useful or as spammed. So yeah, there was just a lot of factors that meant the economy, I think, now was a lot more strict, a lot more difficult to work around, and it was just a lot more streamlined in 1.6. No one really ever complained about that much then. Everyone just kind of knew the way it went. Connor Jones, if you had to make a CIS super team without including Monacy or any Na'Vi players, okay, what players would you choose and why? Also, could this team feasibly be put together? Right, no. Obviously, the team couldn't feasibly be put together because if you know anything about the CIS region, aside from Brazil, if you don't play for MIBR, it seems to be the region where it's the hardest to get people out of contracts or orgs that they've been on and onto your org. Even if you've got way more money, you're a better org, and they want to leave. So quite frankly, listen, it's not the time to go into the corruption of that region right now necessarily, is it? Even though sometimes you just have to, don't you? There's a lot of bullshit goes on over there in all sorts of countries in that region, and a lot of predatory behaviour towards players. So I don't think you could make the team I'm going to suggest or anything close to it. It seems that you can't make super teams in that region. So I'm going to make a real team that I think will be good. And I'll start with this. Who's my main star going to be, and who am I going to build the team around, basically? I've got two obvious names I'm going to build this team around. One's an AWPer and one's a rifler. So the AWPer is Dexter. People will know, if they watch my content for the last year or so, I just think this guy checks out with the eye test. It's not about the stats. It's not about his attitude or which isn't it. Just watch the eye test. He's got not only a really good AWP and one that can hit a lot of hard shots, he's got a really good floor to his game as well, and he's got a consistency, and if you come close range, he will hit those shots. That's why he wins all those 1v1s and 1v2s. I think this guy is just really good. I don't know where his head's at, and why he's let himself end up in a team like OG. I would hope he would be in a team like a Team Liquid, like a fucking... well, now they'd be called Outsiders, Virtus Pro. I'd like him to be one of these teams, but for whatever reason, or Na'Vi if he could be... For whatever reason, he has to be an OG. I think he's mustard. I think he's a really good player. He's the AWPer I'm going to build this team around. Bear in mind, I can't take Simple and I can't take Monacy. Yes, I might also have taken Wonderful from Team Spirit. I think he has a lot of promise too. But I think Dexter's just way further along. Looks like a more complete player. Doesn't need his hand-holding, as it were. He's ready to be a star player and be a top 10 player in the world, in my opinion. The other rifle I'm going to base it around, so now obviously we're not talking about the sniper rifle, I'm going to take Flit from Outsider/Virtus Pro. I think he is so fucking strong as a rifler over the last year or so, and especially this last period. Like, he was, put it this way, if it wasn't for the fact that JM called and won those clutches and did all, if it wasn't for every other aspect as well, I think it was totally reasonable if someone wanted Flit to be like the MVP of that major. He was a fucking beast at that major, mate. I think he's just a really strong player. I can see why Na'Vi wanted him years ago. So he would be my rifler. I just think he's a really consistent game. If you build it around him, these two are just going to frag out. They're going to do their jobs, no overlap. Now is when I get a bit cute, because now what I'm going to do is I'm also going to take some other players from Outsiders. So I'm going to take Jame, but he's only my in-game leader. He can secondary AWP, or if we save him an AWP, he can have it, but he's not the primary AWP. That's going to be Dexter. He's a different type of AWPer. And if it's on the rifle, put him on the rifle. Because I think actually as an IGL, look, this is where it might fall apart, because I do suspect personally that Jame and Cadian, a little bit about what they're doing is also they collar on themselves a bit, which makes their AWP work a bit more than it should otherwise in a normal team. And therefore, I think if you make them just the IGL and not an AWPer, I'm a bit concerned that they not only won't be as good individually, which they almost certainly won't be, but I also worry that maybe some of their straps will fall apart. That's a concern. It's more a concern for Jame than Cadian, quite frankly, but it is a concern I have. So if he can work as an IGL, I'd take Jame. And he just seems like he's just got it sorted now. If I can't take him because he can't get sorted, he has to AWP, then I'm just going to take Jerry from Forza. A, he's worked with Flit in the past. And then B, just seems like a good T-side IGL who calls up tempo game and isn't afraid to call rushes, etc. Just seems like a guy who just knows the game and has for many, many years just stuck in that spot for some reason. And or won't ever leave Forza, who knows why. And then I'm also going to take Fame from Outsider/Virtus Pro. Look, we'll make it work with the rifle and rolls here. We'll make it work, boys. The point is he's another really strong rifler. Already got a great combo with Flit right now in Outsider/Virtus Pro. And then for my fifth player, think about it. I've got like my AWPer. I've got my two like strong riflers. I've got my IGL/supportive element. I'm just going to take Inters as the fifth. He's available, right? This is a guy where I think he's worth his weight in gold. He's going to do all the shit roles, going to take a lot of supportive elements and structure within the team. Is going to be built thanks to him with Jame, and then that's going to allow my superstars of Dexter, Flit, and Fame to frag the fuck out. I think this team would be really strong, by the way. The joke is, if you could make this team tomorrow, top 10's a given, in my opinion. I think they'd be top 5. I think it'd be a really strong team. They'd be right up there competing. Maybe be as good as an Outsiders or something like that. Who knows, right? Keyray157. With the arrival of the two-team MSI with full bracket, he means like double LM, who from the West, if any, do you think would be the best candidates for deep runs/wins? This is where I'm going to be a little bit controversial, because you're supposed to say it's between G2 and FlyQuest and then go into why. No, it's between neither. Because you asked me who the best candidate is for a deep run or wins, not who is even the best team of the ones attending, right? I actually think the best, logically, would be the upset-infused Vitality. And the reason why is, one, Bo. Right? There are no players like Bo among these teams we're going to be talking about. So if you want to talk about G2, the Yike guy is the one most likely to potentially break down internationally and have issues when he doesn't have a strong winning lanes, etc. And Caps isn't far and away a better mid laner than most of the mids he's going to play. He's going to have his problems when he plays against Rookie and Knight. And these people, it's going to get hard. It's going to get really hard. And the other junglers coming are monsters. He's going to potentially be playing against Kanavi or fucking Tian. Or maybe, even JJ fucking carried a World's Finals, mate. Or he's going to be playing against Orna or Peanut. These guys are going to give this guy a hard time. So I think G2 is actually a little bit overrated in this regard. The Bo angle gives you a chance from the West, because the joke is Bo himself should be a player where if his career went a different way with that whole match fixing thing, he'd be on a team coming from the LPL to an MSI like a champion, or even, look, they don't take Chinese players into the LCK currently, but he could be at that level too. This guy, it's insane that the West managed to get him. So that alone gives you a massive chance right there. And then on top of it, they've got Perks and Upset. These are two proven, bona fide players that I can rely upon to be absolutely among the best the West has to offer at their roles. And I haven't seen it from Upset yet, because he hasn't had the chance to properly play many times internationally. He just played this last Worlds with this stupid thing with like in and out with the fucking support, and then who knows what was going on with that team. But obviously Perks is mustard when you put him internationally. So I think Vitality is the obvious one to cause the big upset and maybe have the hot run and make it all the way to like a semis or something. Well, who knows on this format. In theory, like semis, it'd be amazing. You talk about like 5th to 6th, bear in mind the 4 Asian teams. Then I'll go with G2. Obviously, I have my concerns about Yike, and Broken Blade, quite frankly, still has never impressed me internationally. But they do have Caps, who is an extremely special player as a Westerner and a mid laner, and can do things some of the others can't. And they have Mickey X, and that's another factor. Look, he's not Carrier, but he is a very special player for the West. And while Hylissang just chills, still isn't back to his best at all. He's just a good player again. Mickey X is an extremely unique and special player from the West. So I think he just causes potential matchup problems, can create players in games. The Caps and Mickey X factor give G2 a chance to make some upsets and maybe have a good run. Then I'll take FlyQuest. Now, the problem with this one is, I do think they'd be good, but I also think they'd be a lot more basic than people realise. Like, I think the practice environment they're in is probably terrible. I think they'd have a really they'd have to adapt very quickly. And let's be real, the main concern I have is Vikla, quite frankly. Because my concern is this. If he's in the LCS, yeah, he should be better than almost everyone. If he's against the best Asian ones, they're much better mid laners. He was a player who had some potential on KT, but these are much, much better mid laners we're talking about. So I do have concerns he can hold his own, and then it just becomes, you've got Prince, right? If there's one role I wouldn't want my whole team's eggs to be in the basket of, it'd be ADC if we're a Western team. How are we going to get the leads? How are we going to get through the mid game? How are we going to get to the point where this guy has the items to carry the whole game? So I think he is good enough. I think he could be as good in theory as any ADC that comes. It's just the problem is it might also be Ruler and Jack. You know, there's some really insane ADCs that can come. But even so, I also thought he had that potential. He looked very, very good when he was on that Live Sandbox team. But you look now, it's just going to be him, isn't it? And then let's be real, he doesn't play a solo lane, he plays a double lane. He plays a duo lane, doesn't he? And what's the support issue going to be? Well, he's going to be against Carrier and against fucking, possibly Mako, you know, some fucking amazing supports. And who's his support? Yeah? Is his support truly world-class? No, it isn't, is it? That's the problem. So the issue I have is I actually think FlyQuest's going to be more underwhelming than people think. I think your best chance for a FlyQuest is give Vitality and G2 and your LEC teams a good game. That could be really cool. But I think the idea that, like, FlyQuest, look, they might be able to get an upset, but the idea they're going to make, like, a really deep run in the playoff portion, I just don't think it's going to happen, I'm afraid. Even though I think it's a cool angle with the Korean team, and let's see, maybe they can actually come with a different perspective from what we used to from an LCS team, because they are largely Korean with Korean coach and stuff. I also think, by the way, if we're just throwing in names that could potentially go, the outside one, look, the Skenda angle sort of ruins this for me, but I think if Koi went, they'd actually be pretty decent. Like, if you think of some of the teams that might be able to go from the Asian regions, like maybe a Gen G or an EDG, I think actually Koi and the way they play out the game, a little bit of a slower pace, mainly around, like, you know, CS in, etc., and following up on Malran Ganks. I actually think they would be a team that could potentially team fight decently enough and sort of stick in a game with these big squads longer than you expect, maybe like the old Season 9 Team Liquid, where they weren't going to win the tournament, but they could sort of hang around with some of these really strong Asian teams, more so than sometimes stronger Western teams could. I think that's a pretty good angle. So for me, Vitality's the number one, and then G2 is the obvious number two. NA Kerfuffle. So a few years ago, I asked a question involving an all-Western playoff narratively. This question will basically be a forked road to that question, right? If this doesn't contain that question, I'm probably skipping it. I'm not going to waste my time, mate. Like, the point of paying the money isn't to waste my time. It's to ask, to me, communicate an idea effectively from your brain to mine that then I can answer in an entertaining and interesting manner. So if I can't do that, you failed, not me. So continuing with the hype, how can I continue with a scenario from years ago, bro? Years ago. Continuing with the hypothetical scenario of game of last question, let's say both LEC and LCS adopt the winter split but start 1 week earlier than this year. Why? Why do you never give a reason as to... You know what? I'm going to give you one more chance. Winter split is now a qualification tournament for a Rift Rival style tournament for the second half of spring. Why? Why any of this stuff? Right, you know what? I'm not doing this. I'm going to read the rest of the question and that's the end. So either don't ask questions in future, you specifically and only you, or ask them in a way where it feels like you actually give a fuck. If you're doing this to tell me, by the way, I'm never reading your questions ever again. So I'm going to watch out for the next one comes from this person. Winter Split is now a qualification for a Rift Rival style tournament for the second half of Spring Split that takes place in Europe. No reason given as to why. This is due to there being a last chance qualifier tournament that takes place either in NA or EU in the first half of spring. Any angle, what floats your mind? What floats my mind is, why do I read these questions by you? Right, Matrim. Which upsets, this is one, by the way, that I've earmarked. So if you go to the link in the description below, and the $75 or above tier, this is a question, this is a topic you can vote for to have a much longer video, a solo video just on this topic. Because when I was looking at it, this could be an hour-long video just in CSGO, just in League of Legends. So let's get into it. Which upsets in CSGO/LOL were the most disappointing to you personally in terms of the matchups they prevented? See the key detail there. It's not just like an upset happened, I wish the other team won. It's like the worst thing is, because the upset happened, it ruined a future matchup or a bracket or something. So he gives an example, great example. ENCE beating Liquid in the Katowice 2019 major, preventing a possible Liquid versus Astralis final. So, okay, I'll take that one, actually. Yes, I agree with you. I'll do a few in CSGO, and we'll do a few in League of Legends, because you asked for CSGO and League of Legends. And then what I'll do is I'll do a few, and then as I said, this question is available. If you vote on it and it wins, I'll do a whole video on this topic, and I'll go really deep. So CSGO, I'll start with the one you said. The crucial thing is, in some ways, there were two upsets that both ruined that tournament, right? Because let's be real, ENCE was never going to beat Astralis. Like, stylistically, they were so gapped by Astralis. Primarily, I know later they did beat Astralis because Astralis did the Blast Astralis thing and just chilled for a while and didn't go to tournaments. But at this time in their prime, they weren't going to beat Astralis. So the final was ruined when ENCE made it, but ENCE beat Liquid and Na'Vi. So as a result, if Liquid make it there, that'll be very interesting. If Na'Vi can make it there, it's the simple angle. Both of those finals will be banger finals potentially, or could have been really great. But when ENCE made it, it was going to be a much worse final. So actually, both of those ones, quite frankly, they ruined. Obviously, the Liquid one's the one you'd rather see. The ideal scenario for that year, even if all the results went the same, aside from this one match, is even if Liquid loses the Katowice final, at least at both majors they played Astralis, at least they'd have been in a major final, because they were trying to be the team of the year. And obviously, that was arguably the best year in their history, and they didn't make it past the quarters of either major, which is a massive knock if you want to be the greatest team of all time and have an major and all that crap. So that was a problem. I think there's a few other from majors, actually. So ESL 1 Cologne 2016, this is an angle a lot of people won't understand, actually. Even though you might have loved it when Liquid beat Na'Vi and then beat Fnatic, here's the angle people forget. One, Na'Vi and Fnatic were better teams in the world than Team Liquid. And two, in the final of this tournament, you played SK Gaming, the number one team in the world and the reigning major champions. And Team Liquid had their own rivalry because of the last major, but it wasn't a real Team Liquid line. It was a stand-in for Simple in this major at Cologne. So it wasn't a true, like, the rivalry's back. No one really thought like that. Instead, if they'd have played Na'Vi in the major final, well, that was the person they played in the last major final, but then Na'Vi had that whole thing with Guardian's Hand, so it would be a cool rematch. And Na'Vi was the original person, the original rival that this team, when they were Luminosity, had to get to the level of, then overcome after a few years. And Fnatic, if people don't know, I think that at the time, SK's lineup had never beaten Fnatic on LAN in like a series or whatever. So this would have been the best one for SK's legacy, that they win the second major, but do it over the main rival that's always been in their heads, holding them back, even from when they'd made this 5-man lineup at DreamHack Winter the previous year. The first game was the 16-0 by Fnatic on Dust 2. And then they lost them in the final. This would have been such a narratively amazing final to have that Fnatic core, the one that had won the 6 tournaments and now got North back again, against SK in the final. Instead, we got Liquid, and it was a terrible final. So that would have been a really, really awesome narrative final. And by the way, for the SK guys, it could have meant a lot if they'd have won that one. Even at DreamHack Winter 2013, I've got an obvious one here, which is if Complexity hadn't have beaten Very Games in the group stage, where Nothing and Swag did that bullshit where they snuck out onto the other site on Inferno and faked that they'd taken the B site. That meant that Very Games ended up on the same side of the bracket as NIP, including with all the best teams at the time, and they had to play them in the semis. If they'd have been on the other side of the bracket, they were inside Fnatic's heads. I think they would have beaten them. And quite frankly, I think they would have been in the final. It would have been NIP versus Very Games in the final, which was the amazing matchup that everyone wanted. It was basically the cause from the beginning of CSGO that had been dominant. They'd be playing for a major final, and this is when Very Games is now the number one team and has won the Star Ladder and won the fucking, what do you call it? It was EMS 1 summer or whatever, and fall as well, but the fall one particularly, they won over NIP. This would have been the most perfect final you could have set up, but instead they met in the semi-finals, NIP won it, and then NIP lost the final to Fnatic. So I think it just would have been an amazing sort of stage to cap the beginning of the game with the first major. Let me think. I'll do one more CSGO, and then we'll do some League of Legends. How about Starladder Berlin? If a Vanguard didn't win that overtime best of one on Overpass against Team Liquid, odds are Team Liquid goes on the other side of the bracket and they're in the final and they play against Astralis or NRG. One of those two teams would have been there. Imagine if they'd played Astralis but in the final after all that hype. One, by the way, that would mean they already, I think, would have equaled by making it to the final. I think they would have equaled NIP's... I know someone said on one of those graphics from G2, like NIP's record was like 32 series in the row. Maybe that was like matches or they include BO1s. Because I'm pretty sure when I counted it, it was like 25 series in a row. And Team Liquid ended at 22 when they lost to Astralis. So I think if they'd have won the final, they would have equaled the record all time. So they would be second all time if they just made the final. Remember, it was inside the bracket with Vitality, who was washed and got beaten by a Vanguard. Renegades beat out Ents. It wasn't even playing Ents. So you'd have played against Vitality and Renegades maybe to make the final. They would have made that final. And also, I've always said this, if they make the final and play Astralis wasn't in good shape coming into those playoffs. They worked their way back into form. Astralis would have already shown that Vertigo card, in my opinion. They would have played it against a different team. They would have tried it. I don't think they could hold that trap card all the way to the final. And even if they do, by now, Liquid would have played 4 different best-of-3 series because they had to play 2 in the lower thing. Although, then again, it depends if they lost another series in the lower. They'd have played a whole bunch of series that I think would potentially be in better form. I just think it would have been a better final. And also, we wanted to have the grand final against the two big teams who were the rivals, not a quarter-final game, right? Because obviously, the final of this tournament sucked. Yeah, I won't do any more CSGO. We'll do some League of Legends ones now. So what I'll do a few Western ones and a few Asian ones. So the West one, the most obvious one to me, people don't think about it, is I would just make it so that Alliance don't randomly lose to Kaboom for no reason at Season 4 Worlds. Because if they win that, then at a minimum, they would have had a tiebreaker with C9 and Najin Whiteshield. And obviously, they actually potentially could have just been them and Najin who made it out. Now, the reason that's cool is because actually, in the case of Alliance, they had a real chance to be on either side of the bracket. Najin Whiteshield was just a better team than C9, so it made sense they actually won out in the tiebreaker. Alliance almost perfect gamed Najin Whiteshield twice and did on the second one. So I think actually in a tiebreaker, they were like the better team with a better matchup. And quite frankly, that slow playing style suited Alliance. So I actually think Alliance could have won the tiebreaker. Well, if they win the group, by the way, they get to play OMG and be on the all-Chinese side to go to the final. So you'd have played against OMG in the round of 8. That's not an impossible game to win, by the way. They came in a little bit dodgy form themselves to Worlds and had a very messy group stage. Then in the semis, you'd have played Uzi Eyes, like Star and Rajcula. Everyone now is going to go, they're insane and amazing. Like, the best thing about that team was the fucking supportant jungle speaking Korean and didn't speak Chinese and had to use pings. Like, that would actually even up the macro game somewhat for the Alliance guys. So I think that would even be an interesting matchup. Even if they went on the other side of the bracket. Remember, Cloud9 had to play Samsung Blue. Samsung Blue weren't that strong in the early game, guys, and their ADC used to die a lot. I could see a world where they'd have an interesting matchup in this match. I'd like to see what would happen if you put the Alliance team against this one. I think they'd potentially do better than Cloud9, even though actually Cloud9 ended up sort of overperforming in that series. And you did see that Blue was a little bit weaker. It's not really actually a surprise that White smashed them, right? When you see how they did in the whole tournament overall. There's one, because I just think Alliance in the playoffs would have been cool. I think it was an excellent team. I want to see Froggen have one playoff run more. Along those lines, I think if in Season 6 summer of LEC, if H2K had won the semi-final against Splice, it was a 3-2 series, they would have played G2 with Perks and the best in the West bot lane, Mithy, Sven, in the final. That would have been where Jankos and Forgiven, and they would have played those guys. In fact, that would have just been a really awesome final, in my opinion. What a great fucking battle. Obviously, Forgiven never made it to an LEC final. Similarly, when they did go to Worlds that year, if ANX didn't beat G2 in the group stage, it could have been G2 against H2K in the quarterfinals of a Worlds. A, you could have had a guaranteed team top 4, but without an asterisk. And then B, that would be the matchup that could have happened in that same summer finals of the really good G2 against Forgiven's guys in H2K. What a banger quarterfinal that would be. Imagine how hype that would be. Imagine how much European fans would remember that to this day. It would be insane, right? Let me think. I'll do one more European one. So I'll say, what about if SK hadn't beaten Origin in Season 9 summer, which is what stopped Origin making the playoffs? If they won that game, they'd have been something like 5th seed in the playoffs. That was the one with Mithy and them and Cold. And they all said it was still a good team behind the scenes. That was one when the first part of the round robin of that split, they were actually one of the better teams. They were playing maybe the best League of Legends at the time, arguably even. They were actually playing even better than G2 because G2 had the MSI hangover. This team, if they made the playoffs, could have done so much more, could have gone to Worlds and everything. It didn't, and then everything fell apart. Cold couldn't play. They used Zanzara for the regional, and they didn't end up going to Worlds. Mithy basically ended up retiring shortly after, thanks to getting an insulting offer. So many things changed there. Mithy's still playing. They're at Worlds. They're in the playoffs. It could have changed so much about so many people's careers, in my opinion. Right, let's do some Asian ones then. Let me think. I mean, one that I always thought sucked because I wanted to see this matchup, especially historically in hindsight, is in Season 9 spring of the LPL when Jingdong, which at the time was Yigao's team, not Knights, beat FPX in the semi-final because it prevented us getting the FPX lineup that was going to win Worlds that year against the IG lineup that had just won Worlds. That's the matchup I want to see. I know later Ning came back and at Worlds that year they played. That wasn't the same team by then, and IG wasn't the dominant team. They obviously won this tournament and went to MSI. I wanted to see that matchup. I want to see Doinby with that set of players working against the super stacked IG. But you never got it, sadly, because Jingdong did the upset. Let me think. Like, there was one that I actually looked up here because I wanted to find some obscure ones because this isn't going to sound like it fits the criteria, but it does. An upset was that in Season 6 spring of the LPL, RNG was one of the best teams in the league, right? This is when they had Mata. And crucially, at the end of the split, they started using Nami. This is Season 6. A lot of people don't know this happened, by the way. Season 4 was the Worlds that Nami went to and failed. And after that, he got replaced by Deft, etc. Then he went to that bad King team that then eventually got kicked out of the league. Season 6, he got his chance to come back. He was playing with Mata in a bot lane in an RNG team because Uzi was off in like Newbie or something at the time, and he would later come back the next split to play with Mata. And basically, they'd been using Whoosh, but then they switched to Nami. They were winning games. In this series even of the playoffs, they were winning. They were up like 2-1 or whatever. And then what happened was, when they lost Game 4, they just decided to take Nami out, bring in Whoosh for Game 5, won Game 5, didn't bring Nami back ever again. As far as I know, it's the last competitive game he ever played in his career. They went to MSI with Whoosh. They were in the semis, were there. Whoosh did that famous one where Monty made fun of him on that stream clip. Like, that should have been Nami. That means Nami not only could have won another LPL championship, this time playing with bloody Mata, like a dream lineup, and with a different team, Uzi's team of all. And then on top of that, he could have gone to MSI. So we could have had a second international tournament for Nami, not just Season 4 Worlds years earlier. Now we could have had one in Season 6 at MSI. And by the way, Season 6, this guy was a really good Lucian, etc. Like, these are the champions he would have played, and he had bloody Mata as his teammate. This could have been so sick. Instead, this actually ended up being the superstitious point. They took him out and never brought him back ever again. And that was the end of his career. Doesn't that suck? This one's mad self-indulgent, but what about if MVP Warzone didn't beat SKT in Season 3 of OGN Spring? Now, you're going to think, what do you mean? They won the tournament. Yeah, but it was an upset. SKT T2, which was Fake's team at the time, the one that went on to win Worlds that year, they were the better team than MVP Warzone. And actually, they were supposed to win this semi-final. And if they'd won this semi-final, the final would have been Flame and CG Entus Blaze against Faker and SKT T2. And quite frankly, at this time, not only was Blaze beating SKT2, they were the better team, and Flame was the best player in the world. So I actually think they would have won the tournament. Blaze would have won. Flame would have been the best. He would have won a tournament, by the way, over Faker, who then later would go to win LGN and win Worlds, maybe, if it all continued the same. Imagine how much more that would mean for Flame's career. You could probably still call him the greatest top player of all time now, and he'd have beaten people like Faker in their prime. Dude, that would look so sick on your resume. Instead, obviously, MVP Ozone pulled off that crazy upset in the final. I'll do a couple more. How about if... I always thought that the Rocks Tigers one title in the LCK was a bit whack, because if people don't know, if you're a Kong, you always come second place. It's kind of whack when you get to win a title because you play another Kong in the final. And it's like, well, one of us has to win, essentially. Because then did you really overcome your problems of being a Kong? So they had that, just as Fantasy and Jangbi and Stork won titles against each other to like Kong their way to titles. Rocks Tigers won theirs. Why? Because KT upset SKT thanks to score 3-2, went to the final, and then themselves lost 3-2 to Rocks in some dodgy ass conditions. Would Rocks have beaten SKT? Well, they never did in the meaningful ones. So I'd like to see it, and I wanted to see them actually, essentially, as the analogy goes, get the monkey off their back, like actually manage to get it so that they're not in their head permanently, as KT themselves had, by the way, in some of these scenarios before this. So I just thought, like, look, it was cool for KT, but I actually thought it fucked up the final. It should have been SKT against Rocks, especially knowing what we know about how the World Semis went, right? That would have just been an amazing year to have those 3 big series of those teams playing. And then I'll chuck one more in for you, which is, I've always thought it was actually a travesty that even though it was amazing for Faker, that SKT team had no business being in the finals of Season 7 Worlds. So in my opinion, them beating RNG 3-2 in the semis was an upset. They almost lost themselves to Misfits before. RNG looked excellent and won their group outright. I actually thought RNG versus Samsung, which by the way was a rematch of the group stage, would have been the real final. Those were the 2 best teams at the tournament, in my opinion. It would have had an amazing narrative because they played in the group stage. I mean, Kelsey always made the analogy that she thought actually that it was losing to RNG that made Samsung figure out how to play properly and level up their style and allowed them later on to go on and win Worlds. She even thought that like G2 could have beaten Samsung potentially in that group. Obviously, Uzi versus Ruler for a Worlds title would be a pretty amazing fucking narrative to make, right? Especially in hindsight now. Didn't get it, unfortunately. And I also just thought that was the one that Uzi could have won and RNG could have won, and people like Xiaohu and Uzi would be considered even more legendary than they are, and deservedly so. Imagine how awesome it would be if Xiaohu had won Worlds, right, as opposed to Crown. If you could pick now, you'd pick Xiaohu instantly, even though Crown was the more flashy player. Yeah. I could do loads more for CSGO and League, but like I say, I think I'll leave that. And then if people voted as the question, we'll just do a massive video. We'll do one for each game, maybe even, and just go into a load of them. And I'll show you on the Liquipedia so you can see the bracket. It'll be a lot easier to illustrate in that sense.
Hey guys, Keijo here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. I may never have found my way to playoffs, but I'm pretty sure Thorin's never found the clit. So yeah, enjoy the video.
The Beatles said they get by with a little help from their friends, but I get by with a little help from my Patreon community. And this video was kindly supported by Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Bot Pounder 420, Torin, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Tosh, and a special thanks always goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to ask me a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers to find out who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy but intense esports discussions I have with my donators, or maybe you want to suggest a guest or a topic that I could cover. Well, if any of those tickle your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where in the description box below there is a Patreon link.